The bank manager's face went completely white. His hands trembled as he reached for the phone. "Lock the front doors," he told his assistant, "and call the police, now." He looked at me like I had just handed him a live grenade instead of an old brass key. The same key my mother had thrown into a jar of junk just yesterday, calling it worthless garbage that should have stayed forgotten. She was so sure it meant nothing. Turns out, some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some of them have teeth. My name is Avril. I'm 31 years old, and that old key my mother dismissed without a second glance just unlocked a safety deposit box containing $2.3 million, evidence of a decade-long fraud, and proof that my own parents had been stealing from my grandfather while he was still alive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Before I continue, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I see everything. Thank you so much for your support. I work as a paralegal at a small law firm in Manhattan. It's not glamorous, the pay is modest, my apartment in Brooklyn is the size of a walk-in closet, and my car is 12 years old and makes a sound like a dying whale every time I turn left. But I'm good at my job because I notice things, I ask questions, I don't let go until I find answers. My family has always considered this a character flaw. The funeral was on a Tuesday. My grandfather, Lawrence Harrington, had passed away at 89 years old. He lived in a penthouse on the Upper West Side, the kind of place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a grand piano that had been his most prized possession for over 50 years. Everyone assumed the apartment was all he had, just an old man in a nice building, living out his final years playing Chopin nocturnes and talking to the doorman about the weather. That's certainly what my mother wanted everyone to believe. The service was small, efficient, and cold, exactly Rose's style. My mother has always believed that emotions are a form of weakness, and funerals are no exception. She organized the whole thing like a corporate event. 30 minutes for the ceremony, 45 minutes for the reception, then everyone goes home. No lingering, no unnecessary tears. The catering was from a place that clearly believed presentation mattered more than taste. My grandfather would have hated it. He had standards. Rose does not. My father, Paul, showed up 40 minutes late in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He said traffic was terrible. The funeral home was 8 blocks from his office. But sure, Paul, traffic. He barely looked sad. Then again, my father has never been particularly good at emotions that don't directly benefit him. He hugged my mother, shook a few hands, and spent most of the reception checking his phone, probably monitoring his investments. Paul loves talking about his investments. I stood in the corner watching my parents perform grief like a stage play, and I thought about my grandfather. Lawrence Harrington was a pianist for 40 years. Music was his language. He could look at a sheet of music and hear entire symphonies in his head. He was also meticulous with numbers. Musicians count. Every beat, every measure, every rest. Precision was everything. He taught me to play piano when I was 8 years old, sitting at that grand piano in his penthouse with the afternoon light streaming through the windows. He used to say that music wasn't about the notes you played, it was about the silences between them, the patience to wait for the right moment, the discipline to trust the composition. His favorite saying was this: "Music never lies. Every note tells the truth, even when people won't." I never fully understood what he meant by that. Not until now. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 weeks before he died, I visited my grandfather at the penthouse. He was weak, his body was failing, but his eyes were sharp, focused, alive. He grabbed my hand with surprising strength and pulled me close. His voice was barely a whisper, but every word was deliberate. "The key," he said, "in the Chopin. Only you, Avril. Promise me." I promised. I didn't understand, but I promised. After the funeral service, the family gathered at the penthouse. Rose was already walking through the rooms, talking about selling the property, discussing potential buyers, calculating square footage like the body wasn't even cold yet. The penthouse was worth at least $8.5 million, prime Manhattan real estate. My mother had already contacted 3 different realtors. Paul nodded along, occasionally offering suggestions about timing the market. They had clearly discussed this before, probably while Grandpa was still alive. I slipped away to the piano room. It was my favorite space in the apartment. Tall windows overlooking Central Park, bookshelves lined with sheet music. The Steinway grand piano that my grandfather had played every single day for as long as I could remember. I found the Chopin immediately, Nocturnes, Opus 9, his favorite collection. We had played those pieces together 100 times. I pulled the book from the shelf, and it felt wrong, too heavy. I opened it, and my heart stopped. A compartment had been carved into the pages. Inside was an old brass key, tarnished with age, attached to a faded tag with numbers written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. I was about to examine it closer when I heard footsteps behind me. Rose saw it before I could even react. Her hand shot out and snatched the key from my palm. Her reaction was immediate, too fast, too sharp. She barely glanced at it before crossing the room and dropping it into a porcelain jar on the bookshelf. The same jar filled with old coins, foreign currency, loose buttons, and other forgotten trinkets that had accumulated over the years. "This is junk, Avril." She didn't even look at me. "Probably a key to some storage unit he rented in the 70s and forgot about. Stop digging through his things. It's morbid." Paul laughed from the doorway. "Always the sentimental one, aren't you?" They exchanged a look, brief, almost invisible, but I saw it. I've spent 8 years working at a law firm. I've seen that look before. It's the look people give each other when they share a secret, when they're afraid someone is getting too close to something they want to keep hidden. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother's reaction. If the key was worthless, why was she so quick to dismiss it? Why not just let me look at it? Why did she need to get rid of it so fast, so decisively? And I kept thinking about my grandfather, his sharp eyes, his deliberate words. Lawrence Harrington was a pianist who counted every beat. He was meticulous about everything. He didn't make mistakes with important things. If he hid that key in a Chopin book and told only me about it, there was a reason. People only react with anger when they have something to hide. At 4 a.m., I made a decision. I was going back to that penthouse. That key was still in that jar, and I was going to find out why my mother wanted it forgotten so badly. The doorman at my grandfather's building knew me. He let me up without questions, his eyes still red from his own grief. "Mr. Harrington was a good man," he said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." The penthouse was dark and silent. I didn't turn on the lights. I knew this apartment by memory. I went straight to the porcelain jar. The key was still there, buried under a handful of old buttons and some coins from a trip to Italy my grandfather had taken decades ago. I pulled it out and examined it properly for the first time. The brass was old, but the key itself was substantial. This wasn't for a storage unit. This was a safety deposit box key, bank grade, and on the tag, in my grandfather's precise handwriting, 7741-2289, First Manhattan Savings. Below the numbers, 3 more words. "Only you, Avril." I photographed everything, the key, the tag, the numbers. I uploaded them to cloud storage immediately. Working at a law firm teaches you certain habits. Documents can be destroyed, files can disappear, but digital backups are forever. I took the key and left before dawn. They had no idea what was coming. The first call came at 9 a.m. Rose. Her voice was sweet, concerned, motherly, everything she isn't. "Just checking on you after yesterday," she said. "Such a hard day for all of us." I waited. There was more coming. "You didn't take anything from the penthouse, did you? Everything belongs to the estate now. We need to catalog it properly before the sale." I lied smoothly. "Just one of Grandpa's Chopin books, for memories." There was a pause. I could hear her calculating, deciding whether to push further. Then her voice relaxed. "Good. That's fine. But don't go digging through his things anymore, Avril. Some things are better left alone. Your grandfather wasn't well these last few years. His mind was going. He didn't always know what was real and what wasn't." I said nothing, but inside, I was screaming. 2 weeks ago, my grandfather looked me in the eye and gave me specific instructions. The key, the Chopin, only me. That wasn't a confused old man. That was a man with a plan. That was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The second call came at 6 p.m. Paul, my father, who hadn't voluntarily contacted me in months, suddenly wanted to chat. My father calling to check on me was about as natural as a shark offering swimming lessons. The last time Paul voluntarily contacted me was 2 years ago to ask if I still had grandmother's silver candlesticks. I did. He took them. I never saw them again. Some patterns you learn to recognize. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice too casual, too friendly. "Mom mentioned you've been asking about Grandpa's stuff. Just wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," I said. "Just processing." He hummed sympathetically, then carefully, Grandpa didn't really have much besides the apartment, right? Some furniture, the piano. Mom and I already talked about it. She's going to handle the sale. I'll take care of the estate paperwork. You don't need to worry about any of it." And there it was. They had already divided everything. Rose gets the apartment money. Paul handles the paperwork. Avril gets nothing. They assumed I would just accept it. They assumed I wouldn't ask questions. His parting words, "Just let it go, sweetheart. You know how your mother gets. It's not worth the fight." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment and thought about the timing. Rose called at 9 a.m. Paul called at 6 p.m., 9 hours apart, almost like they were coordinating, almost like they were checking what I knew, confirming their stories, making sure their lies were aligned. They were scared of something. I looked at the key again, at my grandfather's note, at the numbers that led to First Manhattan Savings. Tomorrow, I was going to that bank. I'll never forget what he said next. I took a personal day from work, which my boss granted with minimal questions. One of the benefits of never taking time off is that people don't argue when you finally do. First Manhattan Savings had been absorbed by a larger institution years ago, but the main branch still existed on the Upper East Side, a limestone building with brass fixtures and the kind of hushed atmosphere that whispers old money. I walked in at 9:15 carrying the key, my ID, my grandfather's death certificate, and documents proving I was family. I expected nothing, maybe an empty box, maybe just answers. The young teller at the counter smiled when I approached. She took the key, examined it with polite curiosity, and typed the numbers into her computer. Her smile faded. She excused herself, made a phone call in the back, spoke in hushed tones I couldn't hear. 20 minutes passed. I sat in the lobby watching the clock, starting to feel foolish. Maybe Rose was right. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe I had taken a personal day for an empty box and a dead end. I sat in that lobby so long I memorized the pattern of the marble floor. The security guard kept glancing at me like I was planning something. I smiled weakly. He did not smile back. Then a man in an expensive suit appeared, tall, silver at the temples, with the kind of face that was professionally neutral. He introduced himself as Stephen Whitfield, regional manager. He asked me to follow him to his private office. His hands were slightly unsteady when he took the key from me. He examined it like it might explode. Then he sat down heavily in his leather chair and let out a long breath. "Ms. Harrington," he said carefully, "this safety deposit box is flagged in our system." I felt my stomach drop. Flagged. That word never means anything good. But he continued, "Not because of anything you've done, because of its history," he explained. The box had been opened in 2011 by Lawrence Harrington. It had been maintained faithfully, fees paid annually, never accessed by anyone else. Until 2016. In 2016, someone attempted to access this box. They had power of attorney documents for Lawrence Harrington. They had what appeared to be his signature authorizing access. Stephen Whitfield paused. But our verification system flagged inconsistencies in the documents. The signatures didn't quite match our records. The access was denied and the attempt was logged. My mouth was dry. "Who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Whitfield looked at his papers. "The person who attempted access was listed as Rose Harrington." He paused. "Is that a relative of yours?" "My mother." My mother tried to access my grandfather's safety deposit box 8 years ago using forged documents. She failed, but she tried. What happened next still gives me chills. Whitfield led me to the vault. The safety deposit box was larger than I expected. When he opened it, I understood why. Inside were documents, stacks of them, Bank statements, transaction records, legal papers, and underneath all of it, a manila envelope with my name written on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. But first, Whitfield showed me the account statements. My grandfather had money, real money, an inheritance from his own parents that he had carefully invested and grown over decades. By 2010, he had accumulated over $3 million across various accounts. Then, the transfers started. Whitfield pulled records. His team had been investigating since the 2016 access attempt, quietly building a file. From 2011 to 2018, approximately $1.8 million was transferred out of Lawrence Harrington's accounts. The signatures on the transfer authorizations matched the ones from the failed safety deposit box attempt. Forgeries, all of them. My mother hadn't just tried to access the box. She had been systematically draining my grandfather's accounts for 7 years, and she wasn't alone. Whitfield pulled another document, a corporate registration for something called Harrington Holdings LLC, created in 2012. Over $800,000 had been funneled through that company over 6 years. The registered agent was Paul Harrington, my father. My parents had been stealing from my grandfather together for years, while he was still alive, while they smiled at family dinners and pretended to care about his health and talked about how lucky they were to have such a wonderful father and father-in-law. That's when everything changed. I opened the manila envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before my grandfather's death. His handwriting was slightly shakier than I remembered, but every word was clear. My dearest Avril, if you're reading this, then you found the key. You followed my instructions. You did what I knew you would do. I want you to understand why I chose you. Your father was always his mother's son. I watched him grow up, learning Rose's values, her shortcuts, her belief that the ends justify the means. I hoped he would change, but hope is not a strategy. A musician knows better than to trust hope. You practice, you prepare, you count every beat. Your mother never loved our family. She loved what we represented: security, respectability, access to resources she could control. When she married your father, she saw an opportunity, an old man with money and no one paying close attention. She thought she was an easy target. She was wrong. I knew what they were doing almost from the beginning. I'm a musician, Avril. I spent 40 years counting beats, tracking measures, noticing when something was off tempo. Did they really think I wouldn't notice my own money disappearing? But I was trapped. They had legal authority. They had convinced my doctors that I was showing signs of dementia when I wasn't. Every time I tried to fight back, they tightened their grip. Every time I tried to speak up, they silenced me. So I did what I do best. I documented. I prepared. I waited for the right moment. Music never lies, Avril. Every note tells the truth, even when people won't. I hid what I could. I built the evidence. I left it all for you. You were always different from them. You visited me because you wanted to, not because you expected something. You sat at my piano and played duets with me for the joy of it, not for the inheritance. You asked questions that made your mother uncomfortable. You never accepted easy answers. That's why I chose you. Because I knew that when you found the key, you wouldn't stop until you found the truth. And I knew that when you found the truth, you would do what is right. I'm sorry for the burden I've left you. I'm sorry you have to be the one to expose your own parents. I know it won't be easy. I know there will be pain. But I also know you're strong enough to carry it. Live well, Avril. Use what's left for something that matters. Build something that lasts. Be happy. I spent my final years fighting a battle I couldn't win, but I made sure you would win it for me. With all my love, Grandpa Lawrence. I sat in that bank vault and let the tears come. Not sad tears, something deeper, something that felt like purpose. My grandfather had seen me, really seen me. In a family where I had always felt like an outsider, he had recognized something true in me, and he had trusted me with the most important thing he had left. Not just money, justice. If you're still with me on this journey, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means everything to me. And I promise the best part of this story is still coming. The silence that followed said everything. Stephen Whitfield made more calls. More people arrived. A woman from their security division, a man from legal. They pulled records from their archives and coordinated with other institutions where my grandfather had accounts. The picture that emerged was devastating. But my grandfather had prepared for this. The safety deposit box contained everything. Copies of the forged power of attorney documents side by side with examples of his real signature. The differences were subtle, but clear once you knew what to look for. The loops were too perfect. The pressure was too even. My mother had traced his signature from documents she had access to, and she had done it well enough to fool most people, but not well enough to fool a bank's verification system, and not well enough to fool a musician who had spent 40 years noticing when something was off tempo. There were bank statements, transaction records, a detailed log in my grandfather's handwriting documenting every suspicious transfer, every withdrawal he hadn't authorized, every lie my parents had told to cover their tracks, dates, amounts, account numbers, 7 years of meticulous documentation, and at the bottom of the stack, a notarized sworn statement dated 2023. But before I read it, I need to tell you about the man who wrote it, because you need to understand who Lawrence Harrington really was. My grandfather was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I mattered. When I was 8 years old and struggling with a piano piece, he didn't tell me I wasn't trying hard enough. He sat beside me on the bench and played the difficult passage slowly, note by note, until I understood. When I was 12 and won a regional piano competition, my parents didn't come. They had a dinner party that night. Something with Paul's work colleagues. Very important, Rose said. You understand. But Grandpa Lawrence was there, front row. He brought flowers, yellow roses, my favorite. And afterward, he took me to a diner, and we ate pancakes at 9 p.m., and he told me he was proud of me, not for winning, for working hard, for not giving up when the piece was difficult. When I was 16 and my parents forgot my birthday entirely, Grandpa Lawrence showed up at my school with a cupcake and a card he'd made himself. He played Happy Birthday on his phone right there in the parking lot and didn't care who saw. When I was 22 and graduated from college, my parents came to the ceremony but left before the reception. Something urgent, they said. Grandpa Lawrence stayed. He met my friends. He asked about my plans. He listened. When I was 26 and had emergency surgery, my parents sent flowers and a card. Very sorry we can't be there. You understand. Grandpa Lawrence, at 84 years old, took a taxi across Manhattan in January and sat by my hospital bed for 6 hours. He held my hand when I woke up from anesthesia. He was the first face I saw. That's who he was. That's the man my parents stole from. That's the man they convinced the world was losing his mind while he was the sharpest person I knew. And that's why, when I found his notarized statement, I read it slowly, my grandfather's voice echoing in my mind with every word. I am of sound mind. I know exactly what I am doing. Rose and Paul Harrington have been stealing from me for years. They convinced doctors that I was showing signs of dementia so that no one would believe me when I said they were taking my money. I am leaving this evidence for my granddaughter, Avril, because she is the only one who will do what is right. She has always asked the questions others were afraid to ask. I trust her to finish what I could not. Little did they know, I was already 3 steps ahead. The police arrived at the bank within 2 hours of Stephen Whitfield's call. 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Division, both carrying notebooks and the kind of expressions that suggested they had seen this before. Elder financial abuse, they called it, one of the fastest growing crimes in America, and the perpetrators are almost always family. The lead detective was a woman named Patricia Morrison, mid-40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense demeanor. She had been working financial crimes for 15 years. She told me something that stuck with me. These cases break my heart every time, she said, because the victims are trapped. They depend on the people who are stealing from them. They love the people who are hurting them, and when they try to speak up, nobody believes them. She looked at the documents spread across the table. Your grandfather fought back the only way he could, with documentation, with evidence, with patience. The investigation moved quickly after that. Whitfield provided the bank's records. The 2016 access attempt was documented in detail. The forged signatures, the fraudulent power of attorney, the security flags that had stopped them. But my grandfather's evidence went further. The detailed logs, the timeline of every theft, the corporate records for Harrington Holdings LLC showing exactly how my father had laundered the money. Detective Morrison asked me to cooperate fully with the investigation, which meant keeping quiet, not warning my parents, not confronting them, attending family dinners and pretending everything was normal while the case was built around them. 2 weeks of lies. 2 weeks of sitting across from people who had stolen from my grandfather, smiled at his funeral, and divided his estate like vultures picking at a carcass. Do you have any idea how hard it is to make small talk with someone you know is going to prison? Rose asked me about work. I told her everything was fine. Paul asked if I was seeing anyone. I said no, too busy. They asked about my apartment, my car, my plans for the holidays. Normal family conversation. The kind of chit-chat that happens at every dinner table in America. Except I knew that every word they spoke was built on stolen money. Every comfortable chair they sat in, every expensive bottle of wine they opened, every casual mention of their investments or their travel plans, all of it was my grandfather's. All of it had been taken from a man who trusted them, who loved them, who they had repaid with betrayal. I smiled, I nodded, I passed the vegetables, and I waited. Sunday dinner at my mother's townhouse was torture. Rose made her signature roast chicken, which she always overcooked and always blamed on the oven, but that night I barely tasted it. Here I was, choking down dry poultry while sitting across from 2 people who had made theft their family business. Rose talked about the penthouse sale. She had found a buyer, good price, quick closing, $8.2 million, she announced proudly, like she had earned it. Paul nodded along, mentioned some investment opportunities he was excited about, something about diversifying the portfolio. They were so confident, so certain they had gotten away with everything. Your grandfather will be happy to know the apartment is going to a nice family, Rose said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. He always said he wanted it to be appreciated. I nodded, smiled, said nothing. My grandfather would not be happy. My grandfather had spent his final years documenting their crimes and hiding evidence in a safety deposit box because these 2 people had stolen nearly $2 million from him and convinced the world he was losing his mind. But I waited. I documented. I trusted the process. My grandfather taught me piano when I was 8 years old. His favorite lesson. The music isn't just the notes you play, it's knowing when to wait, when to rest, when to let the silence build until the next note means everything. He had spent years setting this trap. He knew he wouldn't see it spring, but he knew I would. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter. The call came on a Thursday morning. Detective Morrison's voice was calm and professional. Miss Harrington, we're executing the warrants today. Arrests will be simultaneous. I thought you'd want to know. I thanked her, hung up, sat in silence for a long moment. My mother was about to lose everything. My father was about to learn that betrayal has a price, and my grandfather's patience was finally about to pay off. The arrest happened at 6:30 a.m., coordinated to the minute. No warning, no opportunity for them to contact each other, coordinate stories, or destroy evidence. Detective Morrison had planned it perfectly. I wasn't there, but she told me the details later, and I have to admit, there was a certain satisfaction in hearing them. My mother answered her door still in her silk robe, coffee cup in hand. She saw the badges and the uniforms, and for just a moment her mask slipped. I imagined she looked like a woman watching her entire world collapse in slow motion. Detective Morrison presented the warrant, read the charges. Fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, theft, money laundering. Rose tried one last manipulation. Her voice was steady, reasonable. The voice of a woman who had talked her way out of trouble her entire life. This is a mistake, she said. My father-in-law was mentally unwell. He didn't know what he was saying. I was trying to protect him. Morrison wasn't impressed. Ma'am, we have 7 years of documented evidence, a notarized statement from your father-in-law witnessed by an attorney, bank records of your attempted access to a safety deposit box using forged documents, and a paper trail showing exactly where the money went. She paused. This isn't a mistake. This is consequences. My mother was handcuffed and walked to the police car. No screaming, no dramatic scene, just the quiet death of a lie that had lasted over a decade. Across town, at the same moment, my father was getting ready for work. He was in his home office reviewing documents when the officers knocked. I heard he went completely pale, tried to explain that there must be some confusion, tried to mention his lawyer. The officers weren't interested in negotiation. Paul was cuffed in his own living room. His wife of 35 years was being arrested 8 miles away at the same moment, and he had no idea. When they told him Rose was also in custody, I'm told he actually laughed. A short, bitter sound. She said this would never happen, he said. She promised we were protected. Some partnerships, it turns out, are only as strong as the lies that hold them together. The case moved through the courts over the following months. I attended some of the hearings, watched the evidence pile up, watched my mother's confident expression slowly crumble as the scope of the prosecution's case became clear. Her lawyer tried everything, claimed Lawrence was mentally incompetent, so his statement was invalid. The prosecution brought in 3 doctors who had examined my grandfather over the years. All 3 testified that Lawrence showed no signs of dementia. He was sharp, coherent, aware. The incompetency ruling that Rose had obtained years ago, they explained, had been based on a false information that she herself had provided. She had convinced doctors that her father-in-law was losing his mind specifically so that no one would believe him when he said she was stealing from him. The judge was not sympathetic. My father's lawyer tried a different approach. He came to me privately with an offer. Paul would testify against Rose in exchange for a reduced sentence. He claimed he had been manipulated, that he didn't know the full scope of what was happening, that he was a victim too. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Tell my father that Grandpa Lawrence taught me piano, I said. And in music, you don't negotiate with people who played the wrong notes on purpose. You just stop the performance. It didn't matter anyway. The prosecutors weren't interested in Paul's cooperation. Harrington Holdings, LLC, proved he wasn't a passive recipient of family generosity. He had created corporate structures to hide stolen money. He had signed documents. He had made transfers. He knew exactly where the money came from, and he had helped conceal it. No deal. Full charges. The sentencing hearing was on a cold day in March. Federal courthouse, wood-paneled walls, American flag hanging behind the judge's bench. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Financial crimes don't usually draw crowds, but word had spread. The story of an old pianist who spent his final years building a case against his own family, hiding evidence in a safety deposit box, trusting his granddaughter to finish what he started. People wanted to see how it ended. I sat in the 3rd row, alone. I hadn't brought anyone. This felt like something I needed to witness by myself. My mother sat at the defense table in a gray suit I'd never seen before. Prison had aged her, or maybe I was just seeing her clearly for the first time. The woman who had told me emotions were weakness. The woman who had organized my grandfather's funeral like a corporate event. The woman who had thrown away a key worth $2 million because she was so certain she already knew everything. My father sat at a separate table. They weren't speaking to each other. Their lawyers had advised against it. I wondered if they blamed each other. I wondered if Rose regretted bringing Paul into her scheme, or if Paul regretted going along with it. I wondered if either of them had spent any time in the past 6 months thinking about my grandfather, about the man they had robbed, about the father and father-in-law they had betrayed. I doubted it. Some people are incapable of seeing past their own reflection. Before the sentences were read, the prosecutor asked to present a statement from the victim, from Lawrence. The courtroom went quiet as she read his words aloud. My daughter-in-law and son stole my money and my dignity. They convinced the world I was losing my mind while they emptied my life savings. No one believed me. but I am not confused. I know exactly what is being done to me, and I am leaving a record so that one day the truth will come out. I watched my mother's face as those words filled the room. She stared straight ahead, expressionless, but her hands were shaking. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confident, successful man who had always seemed so sure of himself was gone. In his place was just a man who had bet everything on a lie and lost. The judge delivered the sentences. Rose Harrington, 8 years in federal prison, no possibility of early parole, full restitution ordered. Everything she owned would be liquidated and returned to the estate. Paul Harrington, 4 years in federal prison, felony conviction that would follow him for the rest of his life. His career, his reputation, his carefully constructed image of success, all of it was over. I sat in that courtroom and felt something I didn't expect. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense of completion, like a sonata finally reaching its final chord. After the hearing, Detective Morrison found me in the hallway. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. "He fought for years. You finished it." I thanked her, shook her hand, walked out of the courthouse into the cold March air. Later, my father's lawyer called me one more time, asked if I would consider visiting Paul in prison. He said my father wanted to apologize, wanted to explain. I said I'd think about it. I'm still thinking. It's been 6 months. I'll probably keep thinking. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some explanations don't deserve to be heard. My phone buzzed. A text from Harold Rice, my grandfather's attorney. "Your grandfather left something else for you. One final item. When you're ready, come to my office." One more surprise. One more note in a composition I was still learning to play. Lawrence wasn't finished yet. I visited Harold Rice's office 2 days after the sentencing. The March wind was bitter, but the sun was bright, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Harold was waiting for me with tea and a single envelope on his desk. "Your grandfather asked me to give this to you after everything was resolved," he said. He was very specific about the timing. He wanted you to read it when you could appreciate what it meant. I took the envelope. It felt light, just paper, but I knew it contained something heavy. Harold explained the legal outcome. The safety deposit box had contained evidence of every crime, but it had also contained legitimate investment accounts my parents never knew about. The $2.3 million my grandfather had hidden was now mine. His will, kept safely with Harold for years, explicitly named me as the sole beneficiary. My parents were specifically excluded, with documentation explaining why. Additionally, the restitution process had begun. Assets seized by Rose and Paul would be liquidated and added to the estate. The penthouse sale proceeds, which my mother had planned to keep for herself, would come to me instead. Total inheritance, once everything was processed, would be approximately $3.2 million. I nodded, but the money felt abstract, distant. What I really wanted was in that envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, my grandfather's handwriting, a final message. "My dearest Avril, if you're reading this, then justice has been served. The music has reached its final movement. I want you to know that I'm at peace, not because of the money, but because I know it will be in the right hands, your hands. Do something beautiful with it, Avril. Build something that lasts. Create something that matters. And remember what I taught you at the piano all those years ago. The music isn't just the notes. It's the silence between them. It's the patience to wait for the right moment. It's the trust that the composition will resolve the way it's meant to. You were my favorite composition, Avril, the one I'm most proud of. Play on. With all my love, forever, Grandpa Lawrence." That was 6 months ago. I quit my job at the law firm, paid off my debts, found a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn with tall windows and good light, and I opened a music school. Harrington Notes. a place where kids who couldn't otherwise afford lessons could learn to play piano, violin, guitar, whatever called to them. We opened 3 months ago. We already have 47 students, kids from all over Brooklyn. Some of them had never touched a piano before walking through our doors. Some of them reminded me of myself at that age, quiet, overlooked, waiting for someone to notice them. I hired 3 teachers, all of them musicians who believed that talent shouldn't be limited by circumstance. All of them people who understood that sometimes the most important thing you can give a child isn't instruction, it's attention, it's patience, it's the simple act of showing up. The main room has a Steinway grand piano in the corner, my grandfather's piano, moved from the penthouse. It took 4 movers and a small miracle to get it up the stairs, but it was worth it. That piano had been the soundtrack of my childhood. Every lesson, every duet, every moment of connection I'd had with my grandfather had happened at those keys. Now, other children would play it, would learn on it, would maybe discover the same magic I discovered all those years ago. Sometimes I sit there after hours and play Chopin nocturnes, just like we used to play together. The building is quiet. The streetlights cast long shadows through the windows, and for a few minutes, it feels like he's still here, sitting beside me on the bench, nodding along to the music, telling me that I'm doing well. On the wall above the piano hangs a framed photograph of my grandfather at his last recital, fingers poised over the keys, eyes closed, lost in the music. He was 86 in that photo, still performing, still sharing his gift with anyone who would listen. Next to it, in a simple wooden frame, his favorite saying, "Music never lies. Every note tells the truth, even when people won't." My mother writes letters from prison sometimes, long, rambling letters full of blame and excuses and demands of forgiveness. She says I betrayed the family. She says I ruined everything. She says I owe her. I don't respond. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. My father's friends disappeared. His colleagues want nothing to do with him. When he gets out of prison, he'll have a felony record and nothing to show for all those years of supposed success. The people who had everything because they stole it now have nothing. And me? I have a music school. I have peace. I have the knowledge that my grandfather spent his final years fighting for justice, and I was the one who delivered it. Thank you so much for watching. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss the best part. You will love it. My grandfather taught me that music never lies. Every note tells the truth, even when people won't. He was right. The truth is patient. It can wait longer than any lie. And sometimes all it takes is one old key hidden in a book of Chopin, waiting for the right person to find it. I was that person, and I'd do it all again.